The jungle around the temples never truly slept. It merely changed its breathing. Tonight it inhaled in long, wet gulps, and exhaled the scent of rot and iron through broken stone. Exar stood where an old altar had been scrubbed clean of blood only to be fed again by new ambition. The Massassi had dragged in braziers and poured oil until the flames clawed at the air like starving hands. Shadows made a court of their own across the walls, bent figures crowned with horns that were only vines in imagination, listening for a verdict. He could feel Coruscant from here. Not as a place, not as a city of a trillion lights, but as a bright knot in the Force, a jewel clenched too tightly in the fist of the Republic. It pulsed with order, with devotion, with the kind of certainty he had once worn like a robe. That certainty had frayed, then burned, then been rewoven into something darker and stronger. Now it was a cord he meant to pull until it snapped. Ulic looked up from his knee, the map's cold light raking over his face. Once, the young lord's eyes had carried the quick warmth of a hero. Now they held a soldier's hunger and a traitor's sleeplessness, as if every victory came with a taste of ashes he could not spit out. "The Republic lines are thin," Ulic said. "Teta's shipyards are ours. Onderon bends. Their fleets scatter to protect too many worlds. Worlds can be retaken," Exar replied. His voice was quiet, and it made the chamber listen harder. "Faith cannot. We do not win by taking their borders. We win by taking their spine." Alima's fingers, jeweled and trembling, smeared the last of the ash into a hooked symbol that did not belong in any Jedi archive. Sadal watched her work with the patience of a man who measured lives in ledgers. Their chanting was low, almost tender, like a lullaby sung to a knife. "They'll gather," Alima murmured, eyes half-lidded, as if she could already taste the fear in Coruscant's air. "When the temple screams, they will gather." Exar's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "They will, and they will die together as they have always wished to live, clinging to one another for certainty." Ulic's gauntlet tightened, metal creaking. "The Council does not often leave the temple." "They will not need to," Exar said. He lifted his left hand, and the air itself seemed to thicken around his knuckles. "Their sanctum is a fortress built on ritual and complacency. We will turn their ritual against them. We will make their sanctum a tomb." The Massassi stirred, bone masks tilting. They were not subtle creatures, not born for politics. Yet even they understood a beheading. Warriors loved it. Empires depended on it. Exar ignited his saber for a heartbeat. Two blades, one hilt, a sun split into twins, and the red light made the ash runes look wet. He shut it off again before it could fully burn the chamber's shadows away. He did not need light to see what he planned. "Ulic," he said, and the name was a chain. "You will take the fleets to Coruscant. You will make the skies break. You will let the Republic believe this is only another battle of ships and guns. Meanwhile, I will walk into their heart." Ulic hesitated, just a flicker, a crack in armor, then bowed his head. "As you command." Exar stepped forward, and the old altar stones seemed to flinch beneath his boots. "Prepare the gate," he told Alima and Sadal. "Blind their sentries. Mute their alarms. Wrap our approach in lies so thick their own minds will choke." I. Alima's smile was small and sharp. Sadal's was absent entirely. Outside, the jungle exhaled again, and the rain intensified, as if the world itself wanted to drown what was being born. The temple on Coruscant had been built to outlast arguments. It rose above the city like a promise carved into stone, its towers pale against the bruise-colored night, its bridges spanning empty air with the calm arrogance of those who believed they could not fall. Inside, the air carried the clean scent of water and old parchment, and incense burned for ceremonies that had once felt eternal. Tonight, the incense could not mask the metallic tang of too many lightsabers recently drawn. Nomi stepped into the council chamber and felt at once the familiar hush and the unfamiliar tremor beneath it. The room was circular, meant to suggest harmony, but harmony was a shape you had to keep choosing. The masters sat in their places like a ring of ancient trees. Their faces were not united by species or age, only by the weight that had settled into their eyes over long years of trying to shepherd a galaxy that refused to be gentle. A projection hovered between them. Fractured lines, worlds tagged with red warnings, casualty figures that climbed like ivy up a wall. "You were on the lower levels," one of the masters said, voice mild, the kind of mildness that hid fatigue. "Seen to the evacuees?" Nomi inclined her head. "Families from Forost were brought in this morning. Their transport was attacked on the way." She kept her tone even. If she let anger into it, it would ignite. They had children. They had no soldiers, only prayers. "The Sith have no use for prayers," another master said. Nomi did not contradict him, but she felt the words like grit between her teeth. The Sith. The term still felt too simple for the horror it tried to contain. Sith meant Exar's cold laughter in the back of her mind when she tried to meditate. Sith meant Ulic's once honorable courage twisted into a blade. Sith meant the sensation, faint but undeniable, that the Force itself was being bruised. "The Senate demands an answer," a master continued. "They say the Jedi have failed to protect the core." "We have protected it," Nomi said before she could stop herself. Her hands tightened at her sides, hidden in the folds of her sleeves. "Again and again, at the cost of our own." A pause, soft as dust settling. Several masters turned their attention more fully toward her. Nomi hated that she could feel their assessment as a pressure in the Force, not judgment exactly, but concern, and the wary curiosity that arose when someone younger spoke with heat. "You feel it too," she said, quieter now. "The pull, the dark current, it's not only in the outer rim, it's here, it is close." A master with skin like polished wood folded his hands. "Fear makes the Force loud." "This isn't fear," Nomi replied. Her voice trembled on the edge of something she refused to name. "This is intention." Her gaze slid to the tall windows. Beyond them, Coruscant was a sea of lights stretching into infinity, each light a life, each life a thread. She felt the threads tonight as if someone else's fingers were already pinching them, testing their strength. "Where is Vima?" she asked suddenly, the question sharp enough to cut through debate. "She was in the training hall this afternoon." "Under master supervision," a master answered. "As always." Nomi's daughter had grown quick with a blade, quick with laughter, quick with questions that made old masters blink. Nomi had tried to teach her patience, but the Force moved through Vima like wind through tall grass. It was hard to ask wind to stand still. Nomi returned her attention to the circle. "We cannot sit behind these walls," she said. "If the dark is coming for us, then we either meet it with open eyes, or it meets us while we sleep." The oldest master in the chamber, the one whose silence carried the weight of final decisions, closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Nomi saw the flicker of the same tremor she had felt. "The temple is not sleeping," he said, "but I fear it is being watched." As if to underline his words, a distant vibration shivered through the floor, so faint it could have been imagined. Nomi's breath caught. Somewhere far above them, the sky had begun to break. The first blast over Coruscant looked like a new star trying to be born and dying in the same breath. Defense platforms, old, proud constructs that had guarded the core since before Ulic's grandparents had been born, flared and shattered as Sith torpedoes punched through them with obscene ease. Their debris drifted like bones into the black. Beyond them, the Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace not in neat lines, but in a sudden, predatory scatter. Ships angled like knives thrown into a crowd. On the command deck, Ulic watched the war unfold through the cold translation of instruments and projections. If he had stood on a battlefield with mud under his boots, he might have understood it better. Here, the air smelled of ozone and metal, and men trying not to fear. "Signal relays are falling," an officer called. "Push the second wave," Ulic said, voice steady as stone. He did not look away from the viewports. The planet below was a curve of impossible light, the heart of the Republic laid bare. "Do not let them regroup." His officers obeyed. They had learned that Ulic Qel-Droma's commands came fast and without mercy, and that hesitation invited death. Yet in the deepest part of Ulic's mind, under all the orders and the battle calculations, another voice counted sins. K. The name was not spoken here. It did not need to be. It lived in the joints of Ulic's hands, in the way his fingers sometimes flexed as if trying to open after holding a weapon too long. Kay had once grabbed those hands, laughing, and told him that heroes did not need to prove they were heroes. Now Ulic proved it every day by slaughtering people who had once called him brother. A new alarm chirped, sharper than the rest. Jedi interceptors, the officer at the sensor station said. Launching from the Temple district. Ulic's eyes narrowed. A part of him, the part that still remembered how it felt to fight beside Jedi, not against them, recognized their formation as a kind of grace. It lasted only seconds before Sith fighters swarmed them like carrion birds. Whole bombardment on the temple spires, Ulic snapped. Several heads turned. My lord? Ulic's jaw tightened. He could not explain without sounding weak. Exar had been clear. The temple was not to be reduced to rubble. It was to be taken, desecrated, turned into a symbol so potent it would infect every loyalist's dreams. Hold, he repeated. Target Senate security. Target communication towers. Cut their tongue first. His gaze swept the fleet projection, searching for the signature he could feel more than see. Exar was out there, not necessarily in a ship, not necessarily in one place. Exar's presence moved through the fleet like dark weather, and where it passed, things seemed to break more easily. Ulic felt it now, an approach, a tightening. The force itself seemed to coil, as if a serpent had wrapped around the throat of the world. He imagined briefly the council chamber beneath those spires. He imagined Nomi Sunrider standing in a circle of masters, calm in a way that always made him angry. He imagined the boy he had once been, kneeling in reverence, never dreaming he would someday order war above his home. You're doing it, he whispered, though no one heard him over the chaos. Whether he meant Exar or himself, he did not know. A new flash erupted over Coruscant's night side, brighter, closer, like lightning along a vein. The temple district had begun to burn. Vima had been laughing. It was the kind of laughter Nomi loved and feared. The quick, unguarded sound that said her daughter still believed the galaxy's cruelty could be outpaced by joy. Vima's practiced saber spun through her fingers, too fast for most Padawans, and she had just disarmed Tot with a flourish that made the other students cheer. Then the floor shuddered, and the cheer died like a candle pinched between fingers. The sirens began as a low pulse, then climbed into an urgent wail that made the bones in Vima's skull vibrate. The training hall's lights flickered, went dim, then steadied as if the building itself were trying to pretend nothing was wrong. Tot's eyes widened. His skin, smooth, damp at the temples, tightened with tension. He had always been older than the others, already carrying the sadness of his people's distant seas, and now that sadness sharpened into something like dread. What is that? Vima whispered, though she knew. Everyone knew. Coruscant sirens did not sing for small troubles. A knight burst into the hall, robes whipping, hair loose as if he'd been running since the first alarm. Evacuation procedures, he barked. Now, Padawans to the inner corridors, masters to the spires. The words should have been routine. They were not. The knight's face was pale, his eyes too bright. Vima's hand went instinctively to her belt, as if her practiced saber might become real through will alone. My mother. Nomi is with the council, Tot said, voice low. He did not look away from Vima, as if anchoring her with his attention. She will be where she needs to be. Vima shook her head, the beginnings of panic pressing at her throat. That's not what I asked. Another tremor, closer. A thin line cracked across one of the hall's decorative stones. Dust drifted down, catching in the lamplight like gray snow. Move, a second knight urged, shepherding the younger students like frightened chicks. Go. Vima's feet obeyed, but her mind fought. She could feel the force buzzing, a swarm in her blood. It did not feel like the calm strength her mother taught her to seek. It felt like a storm that had found the door. As they spilled into the corridor, Vima saw faces she recognized. Masters who rarely left their chambers, suddenly striding with purpose, sabers at their hips. Their expressions were carved into masks of control, but Vima caught the fear beneath it, and it frightened her more than the sirens. At an intersection, Nomi appeared. Not running, never running. She moved with the quick, measured grace of someone who refused to let panic claim even a single breath. Her eyes found Vima instantly, and the relief that flickered there was so fierce it hurt. "Vima," she said, and her voice cut through the sirens. Vima lunged toward her, but Nami's hands came up, stopping her by the shoulders. "Listen to me," Nami said, close enough that Vima could smell the faint spice of temple incense on her skin. "You will go to the inner hangar. You will stay with Tot. You will do exactly what you're told. But you..." Nami's gaze hardened. "I will do what I must." Vima's throat tightened, tears threatening. "Is it Exar?" Nami's jaw clenched at the name. "Yes." Another tremor rolled through the temple, deeper than the last, and somewhere above them a sound like stone tearing echoed through the corridors. Nami pressed her forehead briefly against Vima's, a swift touch, like a vow. "Be brave," she whispered. "Not reckless. There's a difference." Then she turned away, robes flowing, moving toward the spires where the council waited, leaving Vima with Tot's steady hand gripping her arm and a dawning sick certainty that the temple's walls were no longer enough. The first breach did not come from above. The Jedi Temple had shields, batteries, interceptors, layers of defense meant to keep the galaxy's wars at a respectful distance. But Exar did not respect distance. He found a seam in the temple's old bones, a place where ancient renovations met newer stone, and he pressed his will into it until the seam split. The gate at the eastern annex exploded inward, not from a bomb but from the force twisted into a hammer. Stone blocks, each one carved with patient devotion, became projectiles. They smashed into the corridor and took down 2 knights before either could lift a saber. The temple shuddered as if it had been struck in the chest. Then Exar walked through the dust. His boots crunched on fragments of sculpture. A statue of a long-dead master lay in pieces at his feet, the face split neatly, eyes staring in 2 directions at once. Exar's lips curved faintly, not in humor but in recognition. This was what he had come to do, split things that believed they were whole. The Massassi followed, hunched and eager, bone masks turning their faces into skulls. Their claws scraped stone. Their blades were crude compared to Jedi elegance, but crude did not mean weak. They had been born in these ruins and raised on Exar's hunger. To them, the temple was not sacred, it was prey. A line of Jedi Knights formed farther down the corridor, sabers ignited, blue and green, and the rare flash of yellow. Their faces were tense but composed. They had been trained for war even when the Order pretended it was above it. "Hold," one of them called. Exar lifted his saber, and twin red blades ignited with a snarl that seemed to make the air itself recoil. For an instant, the corridor was painted in bloodlight, and the Jedi line looked like a row of men standing before an execution block. He did not charge. He did not need to. He advanced with measured steps, like a king walking toward a throne already prepared. The first knight lunged, brave and doomed. Exar turned his wrists, and the double blade spun, a circle of red that devoured the knight's blue in a shower of sparks. The knight's saber clattered to the ground, severed. A heartbeat later, the knight fell with a sound like a sigh. The Massassi surged, and the corridor became noise and light and the smell of burned cloth. Exar moved through it with terrible grace. He parried strikes he could not have seen with his eyes, because he was not seeing with eyes. He was reading intentions, tasting fear, watching the force ripple in bodies moments before they acted. To him, the knights were not opponents. They were pages in a book he had already read. A young Jedi, barely past adolescence, screamed as a Massassi blade opened his shoulder. Exar glanced at the boy, and felt briefly the ghost of his own youth, a time when pain had meant something other than fuel. The ghost lasted a breath. He crushed it. "Spare the Padawans," he told his warriors, almost casually, as if discussing rations. "Not out of mercy, out of utility." He stepped over fallen bodies and approached the central lift, an elegant column that carried masters to the highest spires. Its doors were sealed, but seals were only agreements, and Exar had stopped agreeing with the Jedi long ago. He laid his palm against the metal and whispered a word he had learned in a tomb on Onderon, a word that tasted like old bones. The doors slid open. Inside, the lift was empty, waiting like a throat. Exar entered, alone, and let the doors close behind him, sealing him into a narrow column of rising silence. The lift began to climb, and with it rose the dark pressure in the force, tightening, toward the chamber where the Order's spine sat in its circle. As the lift ascended, Exar closed his eyes and smiled as if savoring wine. Above, the Council awaited him. The doors opened without ceremony. One moment the chamber was a circle of quiet defiance, the masters standing from their seats in unison, robes falling into place like armor. The next moment the doors slid aside, and Exar Kun stood framed by the corridor's dimness, a shadow given human shape. For an instant, no one moved. Nomi felt the force tighten, like a hand closing around her ribs. The air in the chamber changed, thickening with a presence that did not merely enter a room, but claimed it. The lamps along the walls flickered, their light bending strangely, as if unsure how to behave around him. Exar's gaze swept the circle. It lingered on Nomi, not because she was the weakest, but because she was not. He remembered her from Ossus, from debates and training sessions, from the way she listened more than she spoke. He remembered the light in her, bright and stubborn. "Exar," one of the masters said, voice steady. "Stand down." Exar's mouth curved. "Stand down," he echoed, as if tasting the phrase. "You say it like an order, like the galaxy still belongs to you." "It belongs to the living," the master replied. "And yet you have let so many die," Exar said softly. His tone carried something almost intimate, the way a lover might speak of betrayal. "You have watched worlds burn and called it balance. You have sent children to fight and called it discipline. You have hidden behind calm while the dark grew strong enough to knock on your door." Nomi stepped forward. "You chose this," she said, and she hated that her voice shook with anger. "No tomb, no artifact, no prophecy forced your hand. You chose." "No." Exar's eyes gleamed. "Did I?" He lifted his left hand, palm up, as if offering her an invisible gift. "Or did the Force finally show me what you refused to see?" The master's sabers ignited around the circle, light blooming in blues and greens like the first sparks of a defensive fire. Nomi ignited hers last, a green blade humming with the steadiness she had fought for. Exar did not his saber yet. He looked at them as if they were already ghosts. "Listen," the oldest master said, and his voice carried the authority of centuries. "You were one of us. You can still—" "No," Exar said, and the word landed like a stone dropped into a well. "I was yours. There is a difference." He moved then, not a charge, not a leap, but a simple step forward that somehow collapsed the room's distance. The force surged with him. Several masters staggered as if struck by a sudden wind. Exar's saber ignited, twin red blades erupting with a savage hiss, and the chamber's white stone turned the color of fresh wounds. The first master to engage was swift, blade arcing toward Exar's neck. Exar's double blade turned, and the master's strike met nothing but a spinning wall of red. Sparks flew. The master's saber snapped in half at the hilt, as if the metal had been paper. The master stared down at his ruined weapon in disbelief. Exar did not allow disbelief to become retreat. He twisted and struck. The master fell, robe darkening. The circle tightened. The masters moved together now, attempting to become one will, one defense. Nomi felt their unity and reached for it, adding her own strength, her own clarity. For a breath, she believed it might be enough. Then Exar laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It did not fill the chamber. It was small, almost private, as if he were amused by a child's bravery. "You still think harmony will save you," he said, and his voice slid into the Force like poison. "Let me teach you what unity looks like." He spread his fingers, and something unseen rippled outward. Nami's mind flashed with images that were not hers. Dead knights in corridors, Padawans screaming, Coruscant's sky tearing open. The masters around her flinched, their concentration fractured. Exar had not attacked their bodies. He had attacked their balance. Nomi forced herself to breathe. She dug her heels into the floor, grounding. "Focus!" she shouted. But the storm Exar carried had already found cracks in them, and it poured through. The duel became a language. In its grammar there was no room for speeches, only for intent. Strike, parry, feint, yield. Nomi spoke with precision, every movement rooted in the teachings she had bled for. Exar spoke with speed and improvisation, the wild elegance of someone who had stopped caring what was proper and cared only what was possible. Their blades met, green against red, and the impact shuddered through Nami's arms. Exar's strength was not only muscle, it was a current, a relentless tide pushing against her stance. She adjusted, turning the force of his strike into a spiral, redirecting rather than resisting. For a heartbeat, she found an opening and sliced toward his shoulder. Exar twisted like smoke and avoided it by the width of a breath. His double blades spun, one end coming for her ribs while the other threatened her throat, an impossible geometry. Nomi dropped, rolled, came up inside the arc, her saber snapping up to catch the lower blade with a hiss of burned air. "You've improved," Exar murmured, close enough that she could see the faint scars along his jaw, old training marks, reminders of when he had been mortal in the same way she was. "They made you useful." "They made me human," Nomi spat, and shoved him back with the force. Exar skidded across the stone, boots scraping. He grinned as if delighted. "Yes," he said. "Human, afraid, attached, all the things they told us to deny." Around them the council fell apart. A master tried to flank Exar, blade raised. Exar's hand flicked, and the master froze, caught in an invisible grip. The master's eyes widened, muscles straining, but he could not move. Exar did not even look at him as he drove the rear blade of his saber backward, impaling the helpless man with casual brutality. The body collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Nami's throat tightened. The force screamed with each death, a chorus of severed threads. She tried to hold on to calm, but grief surged, hot and immediate. These were not distant casualties on a holomap. These were people, teachers, voices that had guided her when her own faith wavered. "Stop," she snarled, and threw herself at Exar with a ferocity she had not known she possessed. For several breaths, she drove him back. Her blade moved with a clarity sharpened by loss. Exar's grin faded, not into fear, but into focus. He matched her, strike for strike, and the chamber filled with the sound of light eating light. Then Exar changed tactics. He stepped in close, letting her blade slide past his shoulder by a fraction, inviting a killing blow he did not fear. His left hand shot out, fingers splaying across the air between them, and Nomi felt a sudden pressure behind her eyes, like a hand trying to turn her skull inside out. Images slammed into her, Vima screaming in a corridor, Tot falling, Coruscant burning. Nami's breath hitched. The visions were lies and truths braided together, and the braid tightened around her mind. She staggered. Exar's blade flashed toward her throat. Nomi barely raised her saber in time. The impact jolted her wrists. Exar leaned in, face inches from hers, and she smelled the sharp scent of smoke in his hair, the faint metallic tang of old blood. "You can't save them," he whispered, and the words were intimate in the cruelest way. You couldn't save your husband. You can't save your daughter. The Force gives you visions because it enjoys watching you fail. Nomi's eyes burned. For a terrifying moment, the darkness he projected felt plausible. That was his true weapon. Not the saber, not the Massassi, not the fleets. It was doubt sharpened into a blade. She forced her mind back into her body. She felt the stone beneath her feet, the hum of her saber, the breath in her lungs. "You're wrong," she said, and her voice steadied with every syllable. "The Force doesn't enjoy anything. It is, and I am." Exar's eyes narrowed. Nomi shoved, not with anger but with pure will, and the Force flared around her like a shield. Exar rocked back half a step. It was the smallest victory imaginable, and it cost her everything. Behind Exar, another master fell. The council chamber was becoming a grave, and Exar Kun was writing its epitaph in red light. Exar stopped fighting her blade. He stopped fighting in the way a man stopped wrestling a door when he realized he could simply burn the house down. His saber lowered. His shoulders relaxed, almost as if he were bored with the duel's honest rules. Nomi felt the shift an instant before it manifested. A tilt in the Force, a gathering of pressure like thunder behind teeth. "Enough," Exar said, and his voice was not addressed to Nomi alone. It was addressed to the chamber itself. He raised his hands. The stone beneath their feet answered. Lines flared across the floor, not carved by any Jedi artisan but seared into existence by Exar's will. They formed symbols that made Nomi's stomach twist, curves and hooks that suggested chains, teeth, hunger. The chamber's lamps dimmed until their glow was little more than bruised gold. The air chilled, and breath became visible in faint white streams. Several masters cried out. Their sabers wavered. Nomi realized with sudden horror that the runes were not merely decoration. They were anchors. Exar had been sewing them with every step, every clash of his saber, every drop of blood spilled onto the stone. The council chamber itself, this place of deliberation and discipline, had been turned into a ritual circle. "You can't," one master gasped, and his voice cracked with something like panic. "This is holy ground." Exar's smile was thin. "No," he said, almost gently. "This is convenient ground." The runes pulsed. Nomi felt it like fingers reaching into her chest. The Force around the masters tightened and constricted, not cutting them off entirely but squeezing their connection, making every breath of power cost more than it should. They staggered. One dropped to a knee, eyes wide, hands clawing at his own throat as if the air had become thick. Nomi's vision blurred at the edges. Her saber's hum faltered. She could still feel the light, but it was being smothered under something vast and heavy. "Exar!" she shouted, and the name came out raw. "Release them!" Exar ignored her. He tilted his head back slightly, as if listening to music only he could hear, and he inhaled. Nomi felt the chamber's life pull toward him, like water draining into a sink. The master's pain became a current, and Exar drank it. The oldest master tried to lift his saber again. His hand shook. He stepped forward, stubborn as a dying oak. "We do not," he began. Exar's eyes snapped to him. For a second, the mask of serenity fell, and something feral shone through. He thrust one hand outward. The old master slammed into the chamber wall hard enough that stone cracked. He slid down, robe catching on a jagged edge. His saber fell from his fingers and sputtered out. Nomi's heart pounded so hard she could taste it. The Force screamed. She felt Vima, distant, moving, frightened, and the knowledge of her daughter's fear became both a wound and a tether. Nomi grabbed that tether. She pulled herself up from the smothering pressure with the stubborn, desperate strength of a mother refusing to drown. She dropped to one knee and pressed her palm to the stone, not in surrender, but in communion. The temple was not Exar's alone. It was built from the faith of thousands. It had absorbed prayers, meditations, laughter, grief. Nomi reached for that accumulated light, like a woman reaching for a rope in dark water. She felt it answer. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but with the steady insistence of something that had endured. Exar's gaze cut to her. Surprise flickered. Nomi pushed, channeling the temple's own memory back into the air. For a heartbeat, the runes dimmed. The pressure eased. One master drew a breath without choking. Exar snarled, and the sound was more animal than man. He stepped toward Nomi, saber lifting. But the moment Nomi created was enough. Enough for one wounded master to drag himself toward the emergency control panel and slam his hand down. A hidden section of the chamber wall opened. An old evacuation route, rarely used, a secret kept for a catastrophe no one had wanted to imagine. Nomi's eyes met the master's for an instant. Understanding passed between them like a blade. "Go," the master mouthed, blood on his lips. Nomi forced herself up. She looked at the fallen bodies, at the masters still struggling against Exar's crushing ritual, at the room that had been their heart. Then she turned and ran. Behind her, Exar Kun laughed again, triumphant, and the council chamber sealed itself into legend as a place where the light had been bent. Not broken, but bent, under the weight of a single man's hunger. The message reached Ulic not through comms first, but through the Force. It was a wave of cold satisfaction rolling across the battlefield, a dark pulse that made the hairs on his arms lift beneath armor. For an instant, every sound on the bridge seemed to fall away. The officers' shouts became muffled, the alarms distant. The planet below looked unreal, too fragile for the violence being poured onto it. Exar has done it, Ulic thought, and the thought tasted like both victory and poison. Then the comm signal cracked through, full of static and breathless urgency. "My lord, Temple sector. Internal resistance collapsing." Another voice cut in, smoother, and Ulyss's spine stiffened. "Alima's. It is finished," she purred. "The circle is broken." Ulic's gauntleted hand tightened on the rail until metal groaned. In his mind, he saw the council chamber, white stone, serene seats, masters who had once looked at him with disappointment and hope. He imagined Exar's saber carving through them. He imagined Nomi's face, refusing to surrender even as the room drowned. A part of him felt triumph. He had wanted this, hadn't he? He had sworn himself to Exar. He had burned bridges behind him until there was no return. The Council's fall meant the Jedi would no longer stand as a barrier between Ulic and the galaxy he thought he deserved. But another part of him, a quieter, stubborn part, felt something like nausea. "Proceed," Ulic said to the bridge, voice hard. "Begin Phase 2. Senate security nodes first. Cut their coordination. Then seal the Temple District. No one leaves without my permission." An officer hesitated. "If there are civilians..." "Civilians," Ulic repeated, and the word came out bitter. Civilians had been dead on so many worlds. Civilians had been a detail, a footnote in war reports. This is Coruscant. Civilians are the shield they hide behind. Remove the shield. The officer bowed his head, swallowing dissent. Orders flew. Fighters darted. The fleet tightened its grip around the planet like a fist around a throat. Ulic turned away from the viewport and walked to the small, dim alcove reserved for private transmissions. He activated the encrypted channel Exar favored, the one that hummed faintly with a strange resonance, as if the signal itself were tainted. A hologram flickered into existence, a jagged symbol, not Exar's face. Exar rarely gave anyone the comfort of seeing him. The symbol pulsed, and from it came a voice, low and intimate. "They have fallen," Exar said. Ulic swallowed. "The council? Their seats are empty," Exar replied. "Their certainty has bled into the stone." Ulic closed his eyes briefly. "And Nomi?" A pause, like a blade held above a neck. "She fled," Exar said, voice almost amused. "It seems even the righteous know how to run when their altar catches fire." Ulic felt relief, and hated himself for it. Relief meant weakness. Relief meant there was still a thread connecting him to the man he had been. Exar's voice softened, dangerous as velvet. "Do you doubt our path?" "No," Ulic said quickly. "Good," Exar replied. "Because now the galaxy watches Corasont. And what it sees here, it will accept everywhere." The signal cut out. The symbol vanished. Ulic stood alone in the alcove, the hum of war all around him. And for the first time since he'd sworn himself to Exar, he felt the shape of a future that did not include forgiveness. The Senate had always sounded like a storm. Even in peaceful seasons, it was an arena of voices, worlds arguing over trade routes and treaties, as if words were weapons and pride was currency. Tonight, with Coruscant under siege, the storm turned feral. Chancellor Tol Eris stood at the central podium, hands gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles ached. He had been elected on promises of stability, on speeches about unity, on the belief that the Republic could weather any crisis if its leaders remained civilized. Civilization was bleeding on the marble floor. Security guards dragged injured senators away from shattered benches. Holoscreens glitched as communication towers fell. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and the acrid bite of burning circuitry. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a representative from a wealthy core world screamed that the Jedi had failed, that they should be tried, that their temple should be turned over to the Senate for proper oversight. Tol tried to speak. His voice barely cut through the noise. "Order!" A thunderous impact shook the chamber. The lights dimmed. Several senators shrieked and ducked instinctively as if expecting the ceiling to collapse. Tol's heart hammered. Then the great doors at the hall's edge opened, not with the smooth elegance of Senate mechanics, but with a violence that tore metal from its housing. Sith soldiers marched in. They were not the elegant, aristocratic dark Jedi some senators had seen in rumors and hollow ports. These were brutal infantry in dark armor marked with unfamiliar sigils. Their boots struck the floor in unison. Behind them came Massassi, hunched and monstrous, bone masks making them look like the dead returned for tribute. The Senate's noise faltered into stunned silence. Tol's mouth went dry. "This is the Republic's Senate," he managed, and he hated how thin his voice sounded. "You have no authority here." A soldier stepped forward. He did not remove his helmet. His voice came through a vocoder, flat and indifferent. "Authority has changed." Behind the soldiers, a hollow banner unfurled. An image projected into the air, a jagged emblem that looked like a claw mark across the Republic's familiar crest. Murmurs rippled. Some senators rose in outrage. Others sank back, eyes darting, already calculating which side would keep them alive. Tol saw betrayal take root in real time. A senator from a mid-rim sector, one who had once publicly praised the Jedi, raised his hands and called out, "We can negotiate. The Republic can negotiate." Tol wanted to vomit. Another senator shouted, "Where are the Jedi? Where is the Council?" "Nah." Tol's gaze flicked to the holoscreens. The temple district smoldered on the feed. Smoke rose like a black banner. Fighter trails streaked the sky. He realized, with a sudden, sick certainty, that the Jedi Council was not coming. Tol drew himself upright, forcing his spine to remember dignity. "The Republic does not kneel," he said, though fear scraped his throat raw. "Not to invaders, not to tyrants." The soldier's helmet tilted as if in mild curiosity. "Then you will break." A Massassi laughed, a wet, eager sound. Tol felt the moment teeter, the way a blade teetered before falling. Around him, senators shifted, some already edging toward the soldiers, offering compliance in exchange for survival. Tol understood then that Coruscant's battle was not only in the sky or the temple. It was here in this hall, in the fragile loyalties of frightened leaders. And the Sith had come to collect. The temple's secret passage emptied into a maintenance shaft that smelled of damp stone and old grease. Nomi emerged first, breath ragged despite her discipline. The runes in the council chamber still burned behind her eyelids when she blinked. She forced herself not to imagine what was happening in that room now. The masters crushed under Exar's ritual. The chamber's sacred calm turned into a feast for darkness. She had to move. She had to live. Living was no longer merely survival. It was defiance. The shaft opened into a service corridor that sloped downward, leading away from the temple's clean, high air into the underlevels of Coruscant. Layers of city stacked like ancient history. Each level more crowded, more desperate, less visible to the world above. Vima stumbled out behind her, face pale, eyes wide with shock that she tried to hide behind stubbornness. Tot followed, damp skin gleaming under the corridor's dim lights. His saber ignited but held low, the blade's glow muted by his careful grip. Behind them came Silver, her Cathar features sharp, her ears flattened, a wound darkening the fur along her shoulder. They had found Silver by accident, cornered in a collapsed hallway near the lower annex, fighting two Masasi with a ferocity that made even the monsters hesitate. She had not been wearing Jedi robes. Her clothing was travel-worn, patched and stained. The grief in her eyes was older than this night, and it drove her blade like a hammer. Nomi had shouted for her to fall back. Silvar had glanced at her once, recognized something in her stance, and retreated without argument. There had been no time for questions. Now deeper in the city, questions pressed like stones in Nama's pockets. "They've taken the Senate," Tot said, voice low, as they moved past a cluster of refugees huddled beside a broken lift. The refugees flinched at the sight of sabers, then leaned in as if hope might be contagious. "I heard it on a civilian channel before it went dark." Vima swallowed. "And the council?" Nomi's chest tightened. She kept walking. "Gone," she said, and the word felt like a betrayal and a truth. Vima's breath hitched. "Gone how?" Nomi stopped in the shadow of a support beam, listening. Above them, through grates in the ceiling, bootsteps clanged, Sith patrols moving through the higher corridors. Voices barked orders. The underlevels echoed like a throat holding secrets. Nomi lowered her voice. "Exar defeated them," she said. "He turned the chamber into a trap." Silvar's claws flexed. "Exar Kun," she snarled, tasting the name like meat gone bad. "He was a Jedi once." "So was Ulic," Vima said bitterly, and Nomi flinched at the reminder of how quickly innocents learn to hate. Tot rested a hand on Vima's shoulder, grounding her. "We need a ship," he said. "An inner hangar, like you said." Nomi nodded, mind racing. The inner hangar was close, but routes had shifted. The city's underlevels were a maze of old service tunnels, black markets, forgotten shrines, places the Republic pretended did not exist. Tonight, those places became arteries of escape. They moved again, faster, slipping through passages lit by flickering panels. The underlevels smelled of sweat and engine oil and old rainwater. Refugees pressed against walls, eyes hollow. A child cried softly, the sound swallowed by the city's constant hum. As they passed a broken Durasteel door, a man reached out and grabbed Nami's sleeve. His hands were filthy, nails cracked. "Jedi," he whispered, eyes bloodshot. Are you winning?" Nomi met his gaze, and felt the weight of his desperation like a physical blow. She could not lie. She could not give him false hope. But she could give him something else. "We're still here," she said. The man's grip loosened. His eyes filled. It was not a victory. It was not enough. But it was a thread, and threads were all she had left to weave. They turned a corner, and the corridor opened into a wider tunnel where a freight lift waited. Old, rusted, humming with unreliable power. Above it, a maintenance sign flickered. Nomi pressed the activation panel. The lift shuddered, then began to descend. As they stepped inside, Nomi felt, through the Force, a dark attention sweep across the temple district above them. Exar was searching, not with eyes or sensors, but with hunger. Nomi tightened her grip on Vima's hand. "Hold on," she murmured. The lift dropped into darkness, carrying them away from the temple's dying light and into the belly of a city under new rule. Exar did not linger in the council chamber once it had served its purpose. He left it behind as one left behind a battlefield, spent, bloodied, quiet. The runes still burned faintly in the stone, a scar the temple would never fully forget. The masters who had survived long enough to be taken were dragged away, their sabers stripped, their robes torn. The ones who did not survive remained in the chamber, their bodies arranged not by reverence but by convenience. The temple's highest sanctum had once been a place of meditation reserved for the Order's most solemn rituals. Tonight, it became a throne room. Exar stood in the center, surveying the space with the calm interest of an architect examining a newly conquered estate. The windows looked out over Corasont, and the city's light storm made a halo behind him. Smoke rose from the lower levels where Massassi and Sith troops had carved their path. In the distance, the Senate dome glowed with the artificial light of emergency power. A throne had been assembled, unintentional at first, then deliberate. Pieces of shattered marble, fragments of decorative stonework, and the broken remains of council seating had been piled and reinforced into a seat that looked less like furniture and more like a statement. Exar did not need comfort. He needed symbolism. He needed the galaxy to understand that the Jedi's heart had been ripped out and replaced with something jagged. Before him, captured Jedi knelt on the stone, wrists bound with energy cuffs that crackled with each movement. Some stared at him with defiance. Others stared at the floor. A few trembled, not from fear alone but from the way Exar's presence pressed on their minds, making despair feel like a physical weight. Massassi guards stood behind them, bone masks turned toward the kneeling line. The creatures made no sound, but their eagerness filled the air. They were executioners waiting for a nod. Alima arrived first, robes trailing like smoke, her eyes bright with triumph. "It is done," she whispered. "The council broken, the Senate broken, Coruscant bows." "It does not bow yet," Exar said, and his voice carried quiet contempt. "It only flinches." Sadal followed, expression unreadable, hands clasped. "The populace is panicking," he reported. "Some districts surrender. Others riot. There are whispers of Jedi survivors in the Underlevels." Exar's gaze sharpened. "Nomi," he said, not as a question. Alima's smile tightened. She escaped the chamber. A clever door opened. She ran. Exar's fingers brushed the surface of a holocron taken from the temple vaults. It pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like a trapped heartbeat. "Let her run," he murmured. "A hunted animal teaches the forest to fear." One of the captured Jedi lifted his head, eyes blazing. "You cannot hold Coruscant," he said, voice hoarse. "The Republic is too vast. The people will resist." Exar looked at him as if noticing a fly. "The people," he repeated. "Do you think the people love the Republic? They love safety. They love order. They love being told that tomorrow will resemble today." He leaned forward slightly, and the Jedi flinched as if struck by cold. "I will give them order," Exar continued. "Not the order you offered, hypocrisy wrapped in calm, but honest order. An order built on strength, not denial." Nay. He rose and stepped closer to the kneeling line. "And for those who resist," he said softly, "I will give them examples." The Jedi's jaw clenched. "You were one of us." Exar's eyes gleamed. "And now," he replied, "I am what you feared to become." He turned away from them, dismissing them as easily as a lord dismissed petitioners. His attention drifted to the city beyond the windows, Coruscant's countless lights, each one a life that did not yet understand it belonged to him. Somewhere out there, Nomi fled. Exar felt the faintest tremor of her presence, like a candle carried through wind. He could snuff it. He could, with enough effort, reach into the Underlevels and crush her with his will. He chose not to. Power was sweeter when it included hope, because hope made the eventual breaking louder. "Send word," Exar said to Sadal. "Every system that still calls itself Republic will see what has happened here. They will see the Temple under my banner. They will see the Senate under my heel. and they will understand that resistance is not bravery. It is suicide. Alima bowed, delighted. Sadal nodded, already calculating. Exar returned to the throne and sat, not because he was tired, but because he wanted the temple to feel the insult of his weight. In the silence that followed, Coruscant's distant sirens continued to wail, like the galaxy's throat learning a new song. On Ossus, the air was dry and clean, scented with old paper and sun-warmed stone. The great library had endured wars, weather, and the slow erosion of time. Its halls were quiet in a way Coruscant's temple could never be. Here, knowledge lay stacked like treasure, guarded not by walls alone but by reverence. Even the footsteps of the Jedi archivists seemed softer, as if they feared disturbing the dead voices sleeping in the shelves. Odan stood in the central aisle and listened to the Force. He was old enough that the Force did not roar at him the way it did for younger knights. It murmured, a river speaking to someone who had spent a lifetime learning its language. Tonight, the river spoke of blood. A scribe approached, breathless, a hollow projector clutched in trembling hands. "Master," she said, and her voice cracked. "We received a transmission. It's Coruscant." The hollow sprang to life in the air between them, flickering with static. The image was imperfect, blurred, half corrupted by damaged relays, but it was clear enough. Smoke rose from the temple district. Bright streaks of ships cut the sky. A jagged emblem pulsed over the Senate dome. Odan's stomach sank. He had spent decades cataloging the rise and fall of Sith empires. He knew what such symbols meant. They were not merely flags. They were declarations carved into history. "The Council?" he asked quietly. The scribe swallowed. "No confirmation. The transmission is fragmented. Only panic. Calls for help." Odan closed his eyes. He saw in his mind the council chamber, the ring of masters. He saw the Order's quiet heart, and he felt, like a distant extinguishing, the sudden absence where that heart had been. He opened his eyes again, and they were no longer gentle. "Begin evacuation protocols," he said. The scribe blinked. "Evacuation, Master. This is Ossus. We are far from—" "Distance does not protect us from hunger," Odan replied. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge. "Exar Kun has tasted victory. He will not stop with Coruscant. He will come for the knowledge that can make his reign permanent." Around them, other archivists had begun to notice the hollow. Whispers spread like wildfire. Fear crept into faces that had spent years believing the library was a sanctuary beyond war's reach. Odan raised his voice slightly. "No panic," he instructed. "You will move the holocrons first, the irreplaceable texts, the star maps, the genealogies, anything that preserves the truth of what the Sith were and what they became. We will not let Exar rewrite our history." A younger Jedi hurried up, face pale. "Master Odan, should we summon knights? Defend the library?" Odan's gaze softened briefly. Compassion for youth, then hardened again with necessity. "We will defend what we can," he said. "But our greatest weapon is not a saber. It is memory, and memory must survive." He turned back to the hollow image. A new surge of static obscured the temple district, then cleared to reveal a glimpse of the skyline. One of the temple spires blackened, smoke curling around it like a serpent. Odan felt grief, sharp and immediate. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was not merely a building. It was a symbol of the Order's endurance. If it could be taken, then nothing was sacred by virtue of age alone. He lifted his hand and touched the edge of the flickering hollow, as if he could reach through it and pull Coruscant back from the brink. "We have seen this pattern before," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "When the Sith rise, they do not only kill. They corrupt. They twist." The scribe's eyes glistened. "What do we do, Master?" Odan looked down the long aisle of the library, at the endless rows of knowledge, at the quiet labor of those who believed wisdom was worth preserving even in the face of fire. He thought of the Council, of Nomi, of the many Jedi scattered across the galaxy now without guidance. "We do what we have always done," he said. "We endure. We preserve. We gather the scattered into something that can fight back." Now, outside the library's tall windows, Ossus's sky was clear and calm, indifferent to Coruscant's burning. But in the Force, Oden could feel the darkness moving, and he knew calm was only the mask before the storm. Victory did not satiate Exar. It sharpened him. Even as he held the temple on Coruscant, even as his soldiers secured the Senate and his ships tightened their orbit, Exar's mind reached elsewhere. Rule was not simply occupation. Rule was control of narrative, of belief, of the Force's flow through a terrified galaxy. For that, he returned to his true seat, the jungle moon where ancient Sith had once carved their hunger into stone. On Yavin 4, the Massassi temples drank the night like wine. Alima and Sadal knelt on the basalt floor amid stolen relics, Jedi holocrons, ceremonial blades, fragments of temple carvings pried loose and carried across hyperspace as trophies. Their hands moved in practiced rhythm, painting new symbols over old, turning objects of light into conduits for shadow. Exar watched them, arms folded, his presence making the torches flicker. The dark side here was thick, an atmosphere you could almost inhale. It seeped from the walls, from the damp stone, from the very soil beneath the temple. "We have anchored the gate," Alima whispered, her eyes rolling back briefly as if she could see beyond the temple's roof into the stars. "Coruscant's wounds are open. Through them your will can reach." Sadal's voice was flatter. "The Jedi are scattered," he said. "Their hierarchy is severed, but scattered prey can still bite." Exar's gaze did not leave the relics. He could feel the temple on Coruscant, the way its stones resisted him even under occupation. The Jedi had built their sanctuaries with more than architecture. They had built them with discipline, with repeated acts of calm that left echoes in the Force. Those echoes were stubborn. Exar admired that stubbornness even as he sought to break it. He stepped forward and placed his palm atop a holocron. The object vibrated faintly, reacting to his touch with a mixture of recognition and revulsion. Exar smiled. "You can't hide light in a box," he murmured. "You can only delay its consumption." He closed his eyes and drew on the dark side. It rose eagerly, a tide that had been waiting for his invitation. The torches flared. The air grew colder. Alima's chanting quickened. Sadal's hands traced symbols in ash with ruthless precision. Exar felt a line form, an invisible thread running from Yavin's ancient darkness to Coruscant's newly bleeding heart. Through that line, he poured intention. Fear in the Senate, despair among civilians, suspicion among the surviving Jedi. He did not need to command every soldier personally. He needed only to tilt the galaxy's emotional weight towards surrender. When he opened his eyes, the holocron's faint glow had dimmed, as if something inside it had been smothered. A Massassi warrior shifted nearby, claws scraping stone. Exar glanced at the creature and saw, in its hunched posture and eager stillness, the shape of loyalty without question. Useful, yes, but not enough. Empires built only on beasts and blades collapsed when the beasts grew hungry and the blades turned. He needed minds. He needed Jedi minds turned into tools. "Begin compiling the names," Exar told Sadal. "Every Jedi in the Republic, every sympathizer, every senator who has spoken the word resistance in a whisper. We will make examples until submission becomes instinct." "Nine?" Alima's lips parted in a delighted smile. "And Nomi?" she asked. Exar's expression softened in a way that would have terrified anyone who understood him. "Nomi will come to me," he said. "She doesn't know it yet, but she will." Outside, rain slid down the temple stones like tears that never reached the ground. The jungle listened. The Force darkened by degrees too subtle for ordinary minds to notice. In the far distance, beyond the moon and its storms, Coruscant's lights continued to burn. Still bright, still defiant, but now under the shadow of a man who had learned how to make even light serve him. The inner hangar smelled like dust and old fuel, the scent of a place forgotten by those who preferred clean corridors and ceremony. It lay behind a sealed maintenance door marked with codes few in the temple still remembered. Nomi did. She had learned them during her early years, when she had insisted that a Jedi who could not navigate the temple's bones had no business calling it home. Now those bones were cracked, and she was grateful for every secret she had once memorized. The door opened with a reluctant hiss, and the hangar revealed itself. A dim cavern of durasteel and shadow, lined with a handful of vessels kept for emergencies that were rarely spoken of. Most were small, unremarkable transports, fast enough to run, quiet enough to hide. One, in the far corner, was older than the rest, its hull patched and scuffed as if it had lived a life outside the temple's polite world. "It will fly?" Vima asked, voice thin. "It must," Nomi replied. Tot moved ahead, scanning the hangar's perimeter with a soldier's vigilance, his saber humming softly. Silvar prowled beside him, ears flicking, eyes narrowed. She moved like a cat in a burning house, aware of every exit, every threat. Nomi climbed the ship's ramp and dropped into the pilot seat. The console was dark, unresponsive. She swallowed, forcing her fingers to steady. This was not a training simulation. This was not a controlled exercise. This was escape with death pressing at their backs. She pulled open a panel beneath the console and exposed a tangle of wiring. Her hands moved quickly, guided by memory and urgency. Sparks jumped, stinging her fingertips. She ignored the pain. Behind her, Vima sat rigid in the co-pilot seat, clutching a small bag of belongings she had grabbed without thinking. Tokens of a life she did not yet understand might be over. Her eyes were red, but she refused to cry. Nomi recognized the stubbornness, and felt a surge of love so fierce it threatened to break her. "Do you hear that?" Vima whispered. Nomi listened. At first, only the ship's quiet hum as systems began to wake. Then, faint, distant footsteps. Voices. The metallic bark of Sith commands echoing through the hangar corridors beyond the maintenance door. "They're close," Tot said softly from the ramp, his posture tense. Nomi's fingers flew. She crossed two wires, then slammed the panel shut. The console flickered. Lights blinked to life. The ship's engines coughed, then caught. A relieved sob slipped from Vima's throat before she could swallow it. Nomi gripped the controls. "Everyone aboard," she said. Silvar leapt up the ramp with a fluid motion and took a position near the rear hatch, blade ready. Tot moved to the pilot's side, not interfering but present, a steady presence like a hand on the shoulder. The ship's systems whined as they powered up. The hangar's blast doors were sealed. Nomi reached for the emergency override. The panel flashed red. Authorization denied. She clenched her jaw. Of course. Exar would have locked the temple down from within. Even now, he was stripping it of its ability to protect its own. Nomi closed her eyes for half a heartbeat and reached into the Force, not with the expansive calm of meditation, but with focused necessity. She felt the door mechanisms, gears, locks, electronic currents, like veins beneath skin. She pressed. The blast doors groaned. The red light flickered, then turned amber. The doors began to part. Outside, beyond the widening gap, Coruscant's night blazed with chaos. Smoke curled around distant spires. Fighter trails etched the sky. Somewhere above, explosions flickered like lightning in a poisoned storm. The ship lurched forward. Nomi guided it through the narrowing opening with careful precision. As they cleared the hangar, blaster fire erupted behind them, Sith troops spilling into the hangar, shouting, weapons raised. Blaster bolts streaked past the ship, scorching the air. One slammed into the hull, making the vessel shudder. Vima cried out. Tot swore under his breath. Nomi pushed the throttle. The ship shot out into Coruscant's night, diving between towers that rose like blackened cliffs. The city below was a sea of lights and panic. Sirens wailed. Fires bloomed. The Republic's heart was being carved open. As they climbed, Nomi looked back once, just once, at the temple's distant silhouette. One of its spires was dark, smoke wrapping it like mourning cloth. She could feel Exar's presence there, heavy and intimate, like a hand on the back of her neck. She turned forward again and drove the ship upward, away from the temple, away from the council's grave, away from the throne Exar had built. Behind them, Coruscant burned. Hyperspace turned the stars into streaks, and for a moment Nomi could pretend the galaxy was simple. Lines of light rushing past, one destination replacing another. No blood in the corridors, no screams in the temple. But the Force did not allow pretense. It carried Coruscant's agony behind them like a wound that continued to bleed even at a distance. Nomi kept her hands steady on the controls. Her breathing slowed deliberately, each inhale an act of discipline. If she let herself collapse into grief, she would not climb out. She could not afford to fall apart. Not now. Not with Vima watching her, learning what leadership looked like under fire. Vima sat silent in the co-pilot seat, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the star streaks. She had the stillness of someone trying not to feel. Nomi recognized it because she had worn it herself after Andor died, after the pirates, after the sudden emptiness that had turned her life into a void. Back then, she had thought grief was the worst thing the galaxy could do to her. She had been wrong. Todd sat behind them, hands clasped, his gaze occasionally flicking to the ship's sensors, then to Vima, then to Nomi, as if trying to be three places at once. His presence was steady, but Nomi could feel the anxiety beneath it. Todd had been raised among oceans and storms. He knew what it meant when the tide changed direction and would not change back. Silvar remained near the rear hatch, eyes reflecting the ship's dim light. She did not speak. The grief inside her was older, deeper, something carved by loss that Nomi had not yet asked about. But Nomi could feel her rage like heat through stone. Rage could be useful. Rage could also burn a person hollow. Nomi's mind returned again and again to the council chamber, to the runes, to the way Exar had turned sacred stone into a trap. She felt guilt claw at her, guilt that she had run while others stayed. She reminded herself that she had not run from battle. She had run from annihilation. Survival was not cowardice if survival made resistance possible. "We're going to Ossus," she said finally, breaking the silence. Vima's eyes shifted toward her. "To Master Odin's library?" "Yes," Nomi replied. "If any place still holds the Order's memory, it's there. We'll find survivors. We'll regroup. And then we go back," Vima said. The words sudden, fierce. Nomi's chest tightened. She heard in her daughter's voice the raw hunger for revenge, the need to undo helplessness by creating violence. "We don't go back to die," Nomi said gently but firmly. "We go back when we can win." Vima's jaw clenched. "How do we win when Exar is like that?" Nomi stared at the hyperspace streaks. The truth was a knife she did not want to hand her daughter, but hiding it would not protect her. It would only delay the moment when she discovered it through pain. "By remembering what he forgets," Nomi said. "He believes power is everything. He believes breaking people makes him permanent. But the Force is larger than any one man's hunger." Silvar's voice, rough as stone, cut in for the first time. "Hunger spreads," she said. "It infects everyone around it." Nomi nodded slowly. "Yes," she agreed. "And so does courage." Todd leaned forward. "There are still Jedi out there," he said. "I heard comm traffic before the relays fell. Knights on Dantooine, on Kashyyyk, on distant worlds. They'll be terrified, confused." "No, they'll need a signal," Nomi said. "A signal? A new council? A new center?" The idea felt both necessary and impossible. The Order's spine had been snapped. To stand again, they would need more than tradition. They would need invention. Nomi felt something stir in her mind. An old teaching, half forgotten, spoken in whispers among masters who dealt with corruption. A technique. A severing. The idea had always frightened her. It seemed too absolute, too cruel. Yet Exar's ritual in the council chamber had been absolute and cruel, and he had used it without hesitation. Nomi's hand tightened on the control yoke. She pushed the thought aside for now. One horror at a time. The ship continued through hyperspace, carrying 4 survivors away from the Republic's heart and toward Ossus's quiet halls. Behind them, Coruscant's lights shrank into distance, but the shadow over them did not. Exar Kun had not merely taken a city. He had changed the shape of the war. The Senate Annex had once been a place of polished diplomacy. Now it smelled of smoke and fear, its marble corridors marked with boot scuffs and the faint scorch of blaster fire. Sith banners hung where Republic insignias had been torn down, dark cloth swallowing the light. The building's quiet grandeur felt obscene under occupation, like a feast table set beside a grave. Ulic arrived under escort, though no one called it that. Sith troops flanked him with the careful respect given to a warlord who was both ally and potential threat. His helmet was tucked under his arm. His hair was damp with sweat. Victory had not made him lighter. It had made him heavier. Exar waited at the end of the main corridor, as if he had always belonged there. He wore no crown. He did not need one. His confidence was a coronation. Ulic stopped a few paces away and bowed his head, not deeply, but enough. "Coruscant is secured," he reported. "The fleet maintains orbit. Senate security has been dismantled. Resistance is localized." "And the temple?" Exar asked. Ulic's jaw tightened. "Under your banner." Exar nodded slowly, as if approving a servant's work. "Good. Good." Alima lounged near a column, watching with bright, hungry eyes. She looked as comfortable here as she had in the Masasi temples, comfortable anywhere power gathered, like a moth to flame. Ulic forced his shoulders to remain square. "You didn't tell me the council would fall so quickly," he said, and the hint of accusation slipped out before he could bury it. Exar stepped closer. The air seemed to tighten with him, like the corridor was holding its breath. "Would it have changed your orders?" Exar asked softly. Ulic's throat worked. "No." "Then why does it matter?" Exar's gaze was almost tender. "Almost. You wanted them gone." Ulic's fingers flexed around his helmet. He saw Kay's face in his mind without meaning to. Kay's smile. Kay's disappointment. Kay dying because Ulic had chosen darkness over brotherhood. The council's fall felt like Kay's death magnified. "It matters," Ulic said, voice low. "Because it makes what we've done permanent." Exar's smile sharpened. "Yes," he said. "That is the point." Ulic met his eyes, and for a moment, the corridor felt like a dueling ring. 2 Sith lords, one crowned by sorcery, the other by conquest, measuring each other not with blades, but with intention. "You hesitate," Exar observed, voice soft enough that only Ulic could hear. "Why?" Ulic's mouth went dry. He wanted to say, "Because I remember who I was. Because I can still hear my brother's last breath in my dreams. Because I thought power would feel cleaner than this." He said none of it. Instead, he forced his face into hard lines. "I don't hesitate," he lied. Exar leaned in, and his voice became intimate, dangerous. "You do," he murmured. "I can feel it. The guilt in you. The little knot of light you keep trying to strangle. It makes you unreliable." Ulic's spine stiffened. "I have given you worlds, and I will give you more," Exar said, and his tone shifted subtly, from threat to promise. "But you will give me something in return." Ulic did not blink. "Name it." Exar's eyes gleamed. "Devotion," he said. "Not obedience, devotion. The kind that does not question. The kind that does not look back. Ulic felt anger flare. You ask for the impossible. Exar's expression remained calm. Impossible is a story Jedi tell themselves so they can stop trying. Alima's laughter was a soft ripple. He's right, Ulic, she purred. The past is only chains. Ulic's gaze flicked to her, then back to Exar. And Nomi Sunrider? He asked, unable to stop himself. Exar's smile returned, slow and thoughtful. She escaped, he said. But she will not escape forever. Ulic's chest tightened. Kill her, he said quickly, as if saying it first would make him stronger. Exar's eyes narrowed. No, he replied. Not yet. Ulic frowned. Why? Because she is useful, Exar said simply. Because she will gather the scattered Jedi. Because she will become a banner for them. And when I break her, I will break their hope in one clean stroke. Ulic felt something twist in his stomach, and he hated the weakness of it. Exar reached out and touched Ulic's shoulder, a gesture that looked almost like camaraderie but felt like possession. Do not fear, Exar murmured. This is what you wanted. A galaxy without their judgment, without their restraint. Ulic stood still under the touch, armor heavy on his skin. Somewhere deep inside him, something whispered that this was not what he had wanted at all. But the corridor was lined with Sith banners now, and the air tasted of smoke. There was no way back that did not pass through fire. Ossus greeted them with silence. After Coruscant's endless noise, the quiet felt unnatural, like stepping into a room after a funeral, and realizing no one had yet spoken the dead person's name. The ship descended through clear air toward the library complex, its stone buildings sunlit and serene, as if the world had not yet learned it was under siege. Nomi guided the ship into a landing alcove hidden behind tall cypress-like trees. As the engines powered down, a hush pressed in. Vima exhaled shakily, as if she had been holding her breath for the entire journey. The moment the ramp lowered, the scent hit Nomi. Dry parchment, warm stone, and the faint, familiar sharpness of old ink. It was the smell of memory. Odan was waiting. He stood at the base of the ramp, robes neat despite the urgency of his work, eyes heavy with sorrow. Around him, other Jedi moved quickly, carrying crates and bundles. Scribes rushing with armfuls of texts like servants saving a noble house heirlooms before a conquering army arrived. Nomi stepped down and bowed her head. Master Odan. Odan's gaze took her in. Torn robe, smudged blood, exhaustion etched into her face, and then flicked to Vima, who stood stiff behind her mother, trying to look older than she was. Odan's expression softened briefly. You're alive, he said, and the simple statement carried the weight of gratitude and grief. Nomi swallowed. Not enough of us are. Odan nodded once, as if accepting a blow. The transmission from Coruscant was incomplete, he said. But I felt the severing. I felt the emptiness where the Council's presence should be. Nami's throat tightened. Exar turned the chamber into a ritual trap, she said quietly. He killed them, or took them. I don't know which is worse. Odan's eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, the grief was still there, but so was resolve. Then the Order must live elsewhere, he said. In people, in memory, in what we preserve. Vima stepped forward abruptly, unable to hold her silence. He took the temple, she said, voice trembling with anger. He put his banners on it. A scribe nearby flinched at the words, as if they were curses spoken aloud. Odan looked at Vima gently. Buildings can be reclaimed, he said. The spirit of the Order cannot be reclaimed if it is extinguished. Silvar's claws flexed. The spirit of the Order is already bleeding, she growled. How many worlds will burn before you stop speaking like archivists? Several Jedi glanced toward her, startled by the rawness. Nomi felt the tension ripple. Silvar's grief was a blade. Blades made people nervous. Odan did not flinch. We will fight, he said simply. But we will not fight stupidly. He turned and gestured for them to follow. "Come," he said. "There are others. Survivors arriving. Knights who escaped their outposts. Masters who were off-world when Coruscant fell. They are frightened. They need a center." Nah. A center. Nomi felt the word settle on her shoulders like armor. She did not want it. She did not have the luxury of refusing it. They walked into the library's main hall. The towering shelves rose around them like ancient walls. Floating lights drifted overhead. The air vibrated faintly with the hum of holocrons stored behind protective fields. Groups of Jedi gathered in tense clusters, speaking in low voices. Some had injuries bandaged crudely. Some wore travel-worn clothing rather than robes. All carried the same look: loss, disbelief, and a dawning awareness that their world had shifted. When Nomi entered, heads turned. Recognition spread. Whispers followed her steps. "That's Nomi Sunrider. She was on Coruscant. She escaped. They say the Council is dead." The last whisper hit like a stone dropped into still water. Silence spread outward. Nomi stopped in the center of the hall. Every gaze in the room felt like weight. She saw fear in those eyes. She saw the fragile hope that she might have answers. She did not. But she had something else. She had survival. She had witness. She had the stubborn refusal to let Exar's victory become the galaxy's final sentence. Nomi lifted her chin. "Coruscant has fallen," she said, voice carrying through the hall. She felt Vima at her side, taut behind her, Silvar like a storm at her back. "The Council is gone. The Temple is in enemy hands. The Senate is occupied." Gasps. Soft cries. A few heads bowed. Nomi continued, forcing her voice to remain steady. "But the Order is not a building," she said. "It is us. It is what we choose now." No. She looked at Odan, and he nodded subtly, granting her the unspoken authority of someone who understood history's weight. "We will not throw ourselves into the fire just to prove we still burn," Nomi said. "We will gather. We will preserve. We will fight where we can win. And we will remember, always, that Exar Kun's rule is built on fear. Fear is not eternal. It can be broken." In the silence that followed, Nomi felt something shift. Not hope exactly. Hope was too delicate for this moment. But alignment. A thread tightening into a rope. Odin stepped forward and laid a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Then we begin," he said. Outside the library's walls, Ossus's sunlit serenity remained unchanged. But inside, the survivors of a shattered order began to assemble themselves into something new. Something forged not by tradition alone, but by necessity and grief. The purge began not with a single decree, but with a rhythm. Once Coruscant fell, the galaxy listened for what would come next. The Sith gave it an answer in the language every world understood: Force. On a mid-rim moon, a small Jedi enclave burned. Its residents, knights who had spent decades mediating disputes and healing farmers, were dragged into the open by Massassi with bone masks slick from rain and soot. The knights' sabers were taken. Their hands were bound. The villagers watched from doorways, too frightened to intervene, and in their fear the Sith found the compliance they craved. On another world, a Senate delegation arrived to negotiate, and found Ulic's warships already in orbit. The delegation's holos projected polite words while troops marched through their spaceports. By nightfall, surrender documents were signed under armed watch, ink drying like blood. Coruscant itself became a symbol too powerful to ignore. Holofeeds broadcast images of the Jedi Temple draped in dark banners, its spires scarred but standing. The jagged Sith emblem pulsed where the Order's crest had once been. Citizens watched from cramped apartments and crowded streets, their faces lit by screens like candles in a vigil. Some wept. Some cheered, desperate for any promise of order. Most stared in numb silence, trying to understand how quickly the world could be rewritten. Exar's agents moved through the Republic's veins, spies in Senate offices, recruiters in the Underlevels, inquisitors, and places where Jedi names were whispered. Lists were compiled. Networks of sympathy were mapped. Anyone who had ever been seen speaking to a Jedi, anyone who had argued for restraint against Sith demands, anyone who had refused to bow quickly enough was marked. Some were executed publicly. Others vanished into detention centers, repurposed from Republic prisons. The message was the same. There was no neutral ground. On the command decks of Sith cruisers, officers learned to speak Exar's new language. They referred to Jedi as insurgents. They referred to mercy as inefficiency. They referred to fear as stability. And Ulic Qel-Droma, once the bright blade of the Order, became the spear that carried that language into the stars. He stood at viewports and watched cities darken under bombardment, watched fleets scatter, watched worlds kneel. Each time he told himself it was necessary. Each time the lie grew harder to swallow. Exar, meanwhile, moved like a rumor through his own empire. Sometimes he was seen in the temple, walking its halls as if he had been born there, his red saber a quiet threat at his hip. Sometimes he vanished entirely, and only his voice came through encrypted channels, cold and intimate, issuing orders like prophecies. On Yavin 4, the dark side thickened. On Corasont, the Senate's debates became whispered compliance. Across the galaxy, Jedi hid their sabers and cut their hair and tried to look like ordinary citizens, as if anonymity could shield them from a predator that hunted with the Force. On Ossus, the library's halls filled with packed crates and hurried footsteps. Holocrons were wrapped in protective cloth. Ancient scrolls were sealed into cases. Star maps were copied. Everything that could be carried was prepared to move, because Odan did not trust stone walls anymore. Nomi moved among the survivors like a steady flame. She listened. She organized. She trained those who had been shaken into paralysis. She held Vima at night, when her daughter finally let herself cry. The sound muffled against Nama's shoulder, so others would not hear. Sometimes Nomi stood alone in the library's quietest chamber and reached out through the Force, searching for the surviving Jedi scattered across the stars. She felt flickers, frightened, wounded, stubborn. Threads she could gather if she had time. But time was the one resource Exar refused to give. Each day brought new reports. Another enclave destroyed, another senator executed, another world surrendering. The Sith were not simply conquering territory. They were conquering imagination, teaching the galaxy to expect darkness as normal. Nomi understood then that their enemy was not only Exar's blade or Ulic's fleets. It was inevitability. And inevitability could only be fought with something equally relentless. Dawn on Ossus was soft. The sun rose without urgency, spilling pale gold across the library's stonework, turning the tall windows into sheets of fire. Birds called from distant trees. The world looked peaceful in a way that felt almost mocking. Nomi stood on the library's outer terrace and watched the light spread. Her robe snapped gently in the wind. She felt the cool air on her face and tried to remember what mornings had felt like before Coruscant burned. Before the council fell. Before Exar turned their sacred places into trophies. Vima stood beside her, arms crossed, hair pulled back tightly as if tightness could keep emotion from spilling out. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the sky met the land in a clean line. Vima's face looked older than it had a week ago. Loss had a way of pulling childhood away in handfuls. Behind them, Tot leaned against the stone railing, gaze scanning the grounds with a guard's habit. Silvar stood near the terrace's edge, ears twitching. Her attention split between the peaceful landscape and the invisible threats she felt in the Force. Odan remained in the doorway, a quiet presence like a pillar in a collapsing house, a holocron cupped in his hands as if it were a heart. Nomi closed her eyes and breathed. She had spent days listening to survivors, absorbing their fear and their rage, shaping it into something that could be used rather than merely suffered. She had watched Jedi who had once been confident now flinch at shadows. She had watched masters argue over whether they should hide or strike, whether they should preserve the old order or build a new one. Through it all, One truth had sharpened in her mind. They could not remain scattered. Exar's empire fed on isolation. It hunted lone flames. To survive, the Jedi had to become a fire that could not be snuffed with one cruel breath. Nomi lifted her hands slightly, palms open to the air, and reached into the Force. She did not reach with anger. Anger made a beacon too jagged, too easy for darkness to twist. She reached with clarity, with purpose, with the steady, stubborn love that had kept her standing after Ander died, after every loss, after every moment she wanted to curl into grief and let the galaxy drown. She sent a call. Not words, not images. A feeling, a place of gathering, a promise of refuge, a vow of resistance. The call moved outward like ripples in a pond, spreading through the Force, slipping between worlds, searching for those whose connection to the light still flickered. Nomi felt responses, faint at first, then stronger. A knight on Dantooine pausing mid-flight, suddenly turning toward Ossus. A frightened Padawan hiding on a freighter, feeling the call like a hand on his shoulder. A master on a remote world opening her eyes from meditation with tears she hadn't expected. Threads tightened. A net began to form. Vima's breath caught. She did not speak, but Nomi felt her daughter sense the shift, feel the call like wind moving through grass. Vima's hand slid into Nomi's grip fierce. Odin stepped forward into the sunlight and held the holocron out slightly, as if offering it to the sky. "The order endures," he murmured. Nomi opened her eyes. The world looked the same. Sunlight, stone, wind. But she felt the difference inside it. The Jedi were no longer only survivors. They were becoming something organized, something intentional. Far away on Coruscant, Exar paused in a darkened temple hall. He stood beside a window overlooking the city's endless lights. Sith banners stirred gently in the recycled air. Massassi guards waited in silence. Exar's hand rested on the stone as if the temple's bones belonged to him. Then he felt it. A pulse in the Force. A call. Not a challenge shouted in anger, not a reckless flare, but a calm, steady beacon that tasted of grief and resolve. Exar's lips curved. "So," he whispered to the empty hall, voice soft as smoke, "you found your spine." His eyes glinted with anticipation, not annoyance. A good opponent made victory sweeter. A banner for the Jedi would draw them together, yes, but it would also draw them into one place where he could crush them properly. On Ossus, Nomi kept her gaze on the horizon and tightened her grip on Vima's hand. "We will not kneel," she said quietly. "Not to any crowd, not to any Senate hall, but to the Force itself." The wind lifted her robe again, making it billow like a war banner in the morning light. Across the galaxy, darkness and light leaned toward each other, sensing the coming collision. And somewhere in the space between, the future held its breath.